Welcome to the Small Business Sisterhood podcast. I'm your host, Pepper Makepeace, an online business strategist for female solopreneurs and side hustlers, and the founder of the Small Business Sisterhood, an online membership community serving small business owners in the first stages of business. Join me as I go behind the scenes with female entrepreneurs, revealing the struggles, strategies, and inspiring stories of these amazing women. If you're interested in connecting with like-minded women in a supportive online community that helps you stay focused, motivated, and accountable as you build your business, check us out at smallbusinesssisterhood.com. Today we're talking to Shannon Kenny, a sustainable business consultant who helps eco-conscious businesses become more sustainable without sacrificing profit. Growing up on the Caribbean island of Trinidad instilled a deep sense of environmental responsibility within her, and in 2017 she turned that conviction into her career with the launch of Mama Eco, a business dedicated to helping eco-conscious people make better decisions for the environment. Shannon has spoken at sustainable events as well as been on panels with thought leaders in the environmental world and has been featured in several publications including USA Today, MarketWatch, mindbodygreen, and Grateful. Well, thank you, Shannon, for being on the podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Me too. I'm happy to be here.
So tell everybody a little bit about you and your business.
So I started my business, I guess it depends on the timeline that you want to choose. I've had several iterations of my business, but I guess the official launch of this version of my business started about 3 years ago. And it's kind of evolved over time, but the core goal of what I do, I've always wanted to help people make better decisions when it comes to the environment. And initially that started off as focusing on people in their individual lives and what they can do in their day-to-day lives. And then over time, it's kind of shifted to helping people with businesses, because obviously we have our individual footprints, but then, businesses also have an enormous footprint, globally. And so if we can start to help businesses tackle, the footprint that they each individually have, then, I see the impact as a great opportunity. So, with the core work that I do now as a sustainable business consultant is, I help eco-conscious businesses become more sustainable. And, I usually add on there without sacrificing profit, because a lot of people will say, well, if it happens to be more sustainable, then it's going to cost me. So what is it going to cost me? But there's also a lot of great opportunities when you choose to become more sustainable as a business that open up a ton of market opportunities for you. So you don't have to sacrifice profit in order to kind of do the right thing.
Which is nice. It's nice when that lines up that way.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes I think people just you don't know what your options are sometimes. And it's really great that the work that you do that helps people really understand what they can do differently. And I'm sure it's a range of small things to big things that businesses can do. Can you elaborate a little bit more? What are some examples of, like a business like me or a product-based business or that kind of thing? Like what can we do?
Yeah, I mean, obviously with product-based businesses, there's a ton of more opportunity or like obvious ways that you can become more sustainable because you're dealing with supply chains and shipping and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of like service-based businesses, it's usually, like you said, like it's not all that obvious. So it could be, anything as simple as, taking a look at the business cards that you use and what are they printed on, and is there plastic in the paper. I've found many business cards that are like solid as a rock because of the amount of materials that are used in there. Anywhere from what company do you use to host your website? I mean, we're living in a day and age where pretty much every entrepreneur has a website. It's kind of like a non-negotiable. And websites require energy to run. They run on these, huge server farms, which require a ton of insulation and cooling and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of energy that goes into running a website that, the average consumer just doesn't see or know about. And so you can switch to like a green hosting company if you wanted to, which would, depending on what their initiatives are, your website could be carbon neutral or even carbon negative in some circumstances.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just like a couple of things. It could even be, if you have a team of freelancers or even an employee or two, like, do you pay them fair wages? Is there like, code of ethics, in your business? I know that, typically people see sustainability as just like environmental sustainability, but I think really sustainability incorporates both the treatment of the planet and its resources, but also the people that are in that equation. And so I kind of see it as all in one, kind of, I guess, a more like holistic view of it, or like all encompassing definition of sustainability. So there's a lot of different things, from both things that no one might ever see or know about your business to like things that you market yourself as to your clients and your customers.
I love that. And even as you're like mentioning things, it's like, oh yeah, well that makes sense. And like I had, even the service providers that we use, there's so many pieces to a business, like running a business, and we have a lot of options too. And it's just thinking about that aspect of, being more mindful of who you choose as that service provider, and what their values as a company. Like that's a huge thing in and of itself. I'm a big fan of this, and I can't wait to like dive in more with you probably at another time. But I love, I love this idea, and I love the concept of really looking at businesses. But sustainability, like how did you get started with that? Has this been something you've cared about like your whole life, or is this new? Like, tell me about that, how you got into that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of always been a thread throughout my life. So, growing up, my dad was always a bit of an environmentally conscious person. In his young days, he would say that he was like the tree hugger who would like chain himself to something. And then as he, grew older, he became less, I don't want to use the word extreme, but, I guess more conservative in how he approached, the environment. And so he kind of always like set an example for like my siblings and I, and it was never like, this is what we do. He would never tell us, we have to do these things. He would just kind of lead by example. And so I kind of like internalize, okay, I should, pick up trash when I see it, when I'm going on a hike, or, if I see someone else littering, maybe I'll pick up after them or something like that, and it was more just like little things like that as a kid, about like taking responsibility and ownership over the environment, even if you weren't the person who, polluted or whatever it would be. And growing up in Trinidad, it wasn't super environmentally conscious in terms of like recycling or anything like that. And when I moved to the States, I finally had the opportunity, I call it the privilege, of being able to recycle. And for many years I did that. And I felt like I was an eco-friendly person because, well, I recycle, right? Like that's good enough. Like check off the box. Like I'm a good person, pat myself on the back. And, just over the years, I just became more and more aware of how my actions were, potentially having a negative impact. And several years ago, I was bagging up the recycling in my apartment. At the time, I lived with 3 roommates, and I bagged up, 4 giant bags of recyclables. And at first I was like, great, this isn't going to the landfill. And then I thought, well, okay, but this is still a lot of waste that could have potentially been avoided had I taken the chance to look at my actions. And obviously I'm not responsible for the other people who I was living with, but just in terms of my actions. And so it was kind of like an awakening moment for me of, I need to start looking at my actions at the source rather than just continuing on my merry way and then just pushing it away, whether that's, throwing away or recycling. And so I started to just look at my habits and the way that I consumed and really started to try to eliminate the excessive waste or the unnecessary waste at the source, and just kind of got deeper and deeper into it, doing more research and, educating myself about buying habits. And, at the time I was in a job that I was really unfulfilled at, and I wanted to get up every day and feel like I had like a real purpose, not just like a clock in and clock out kind of thing. And it took me a couple of years to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And initially, the Mama Eco version 1.0, we're probably on version 1200 by now, but version 1.0 was making wooden planters out of reclaimed wood that I was able to source here in New York City. And it was a lot of fun. And I also have a background in art, so it was a great way for me to be creative, but also feel like I was being able to take a waste product out and turn it into something that was, valuable and that people appreciated. But that was a really hard business. You're, literally doing manual labor. I was making all of these things in my apartment. There's sawdust everywhere. There's power tools. You live with roommates. I mean, the neighbors were complaining.
Yeah.
And, it's a hard business. You're packing up, a ton of stuff. You're getting into an Uber, going to a market, you're trying to it's a hustle. It's a real hustle.
Yeah.
And I just realized that as a business, it wasn't something that would be sustainable personally, or profitable in the long run. And so I thought, okay, I need to kind of think of something different. I need to think of a way to still have the impact that I want to have, but in a way that I can support myself on. So then, I decided I was going to launch a blog. And at the time I thought, great, there's this big affiliate market, thing going on, and, people make great commissions off of it. And so I was like, great, I'll do the blog. And the main focus of that was, helping individuals make better decisions in their day-to-day lives. And, that was also a tough business, because you need hundreds of thousands of people coming to a website in order to make, reasonable commission. And so, I just kind of slowly pivoted along the way. And eventually I realized that there was a opportunity and a need for businesses to get support in terms of sustainability. And so that's when I launched the business consulting. And that's kind of what I've been doing for the past couple of years.
I love that journey that you've been on, kind of trying to think about how to kind of marry the desire you have to be sustainable and also promote that and help others be more sustainable and have, make a living that you can actually function on.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy thing to do. And I think that, some people kind of shy away from that because it does feel so hard. And I love that you've tried different things and you've kind of morphed it into what it is now, that is, a successful business that is making a big impact. And honestly, I don't know for you, but looking back on kind of where you started to where you are now, the impact that you're having and the reach that you're having is much larger now than with your original business. And I think that that's amazing and that's awesome. And not only is it more beneficial for your own life and being able to support yourself, but also for the cause, you're able to be more impactful with that too. That's amazing. So how did you know, I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, we have to pivot, we have to experiment, and then we pivot and we try different things. How was that process for you? Was it obvious? Was it challenging? How did that work for you?
I mean, I think, each pivot depends on the pivot, but some, for the most part, I don't really see them as failures. I see them as, okay, I tried this idea and okay, it didn't work as well as I thought I would. So how can I shift a little bit while still staying on my path? All of the different pivots that I've done have always, they've always stayed on to the main mission, which is, my two big things that, in the grand scheme of things that I want to do is I want to somehow help to stop climate change. And I want to somehow, counteract this massive plastic pollution issue that we're having. And so those are my two big things. And those have always stayed steady throughout the pivot. So I think once you have your main, purpose or mission, that's the thing that ties it all together. And when things, you come up against a wall and you're like, okay, this is not working. What can I change? That's your constant, that's your, compass, if you want to say. At least that's how it's been for me. I mean, I suppose I could have, completely, changed an entire business model and mission and everything. But for me, that's kind of my intrinsic core motivator, is to try to work towards those two big issues. And yeah, I mean, of course, there are times when, you come against that wall and you're like, I just spent a year or 2 years working at this and I have no idea what I'm doing right now. But, I always just kind of stop and regroup. And sometimes I have to take a couple of weeks and kind of just really think and sit with what I'm feeling or working with. Sometimes I've, gotten outside help from a business coach or something to kind of give me the direction or perspective that I needed at that time to help me get to that next stage. But if you would have asked me about pivoting, 5-10 years ago, I would have seen those things as failures, but they've all kind of worked towards the bigger mission and informed my decisions when I do pivot into something new, because I have all that knowledge from the previous, iteration of what I was trying to do.
Right. It's so interesting that you even brought the word up, failure, because from an outside perspective, like, it didn't even occur to me that those were failures. It was just like more like an experiment, and you tried something and it didn't quite work how you wanted, so you switched. And like, it didn't even occur to me that that would even be seen as a failure. And but when I think about something like that in my own business, obviously that feels more like a failure than it.
Yeah.
But it's such a common, I think it's like a necessary thing of being an entrepreneur, is to try something and it doesn't work the way that we think it will, because how can you know before you actually try it what it's going to do? And but it does feel kind of like a failure internally, even if it doesn't look like one. And that kind of mental process, I think a lot of people quit at that point. And think a lot of people think, it's just not possible. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm either going to go back to a 9 to 5, or I'm going to completely revamp what I'm doing altogether and go, 180 degrees in the other direction. But I love that you had the ability and the mental strength and health of seeing that as something to just tweak a little bit and not just give up entirely, because it was meaningful to you. And how, like, you talked a little bit about it, but can you tell us any more about how not to just give up when things go sideways?
Well, I will say that I've worked with a couple of coaches over the past couple of years, and something that came up with both of them that I wish someone would have told me when I first started, or was even thinking about starting, was that, being an entrepreneur is one of the hardest, if not the hardest thing you will ever do in your life. And it doesn't
Would that have stopped you?
Probably not.
Good.
I'm pretty determined.
That's good.
But what's nice when I heard that kind of echoed more than once was that I'm not the problem. It's not just me that's having a hard time here. This is the road that I chose, because it's so easy to think I'm just not cut out for this. Because even like growing up, like I never could like saw myself as a born entrepreneur. I'm there are certainly people who are phenomenal at sales and are like born to like whatever, sell or build businesses. Like I'm not, I never saw myself as that person. Yeah. But I had something that I really wanted to do, and I wanted the autonomy and the ability to be my own boss. And okay, that means I'm an entrepreneur. Like I don't, so like there are many times when I've thought I'm just not cut out for this. I think that on a regular, but
we all do.
You push through. But I think it's really important because like, being an entrepreneur can also be very isolating, especially if you're working on your own. Like if you don't have a team, or, you have a couple of freelancers, but like you're the main person who you're talking to day in and day out, it can feel like, God, like this is really hard. But, then you kind of look inside and you reconnect with why you started it in the beginning. And I think just the comfort of knowing that like other people are in this position, it's not a problem that's unique to you. And you keep going again. I have thought many times about, not really, but like about like, throwing in the towel. But like, I know with 100% certainty that quitting my steady 9 to 5 job was the best decision I've ever made. I know that it's something that I never want to go back to doing. And my core mission is still the same. So those are constants, and so that's why I keep going forward, even if I have days or weeks or even months sometimes where I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing, but I do know what I'm doing. It's just the second guessing that sometimes, can cloud the day-to-day stuff.
My God, the second guessing. I can so identify with that. I can identify with everything you're saying. It's so interesting that it's so universal and not a lot of people really talk about it. It's like, oh, I'm so successful. Here's my email subscribers and like your sales and whatever. And it's like, yeah, but there's all this other stuff happening that nobody's really talking about.
Yeah,
it's really
absolutely.
hard.
I mean, even, my husband and I have gone to like, couples counseling and stuff before. And the thing that we realized when we went in there it's in like a group setting is, wow, like our problems aren't just our problems. Like, they're normal problems that people have, and that kind of takes the pressure off
Oh
of
my
it
God, yeah, yeah.
not being like, you're the problem. It's like,
Right.
no, like, this situation is challenging and you're trying to navigate through it. It doesn't mean that it can't work, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point. Like, it's just we're not special in our struggle. We're 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 not
Exactly.
it's just how do we get through it?
Exactly.
And we can choose it's with entrepreneurship, we can choose whether or not we continue to try to get through it, obviously, but when it is meaningful, like your work is powerful, meaningful, wonderful work, and I don't want you to quit, and a lot of people around the world don't want you to quit, and that can help us, if we remember the why behind it, I think it can be really powerful. Sometimes it's hard to remember the why.
Yeah, and even, one of the first coach that I worked with, she had me like list out, my different like achievements and that kind of thing, and they weren't all about sales quotas and follow accounts and
Right.
subscribers. It was about the other stuff that is so easy as like a high achiever to like discount and
Mm.
not pay attention to. And I don't always do it, but I have like a reminder at the beginning of every month that comes up in my email to like go and look at that list of achievements, because it's in this sort of masculine world that we live in, we're kind of just trained to think about like the deliverables, right? But
Mhm.
without like the other things that are really important. And every now and then I'll get a message from somebody or an email from someone, and they're so grateful for how I've helped them. And it's like those moments where it's like, yes, okay, this is what it's about. Like, hold on to this, because sometimes you go through periods where it's hard to remember those reminders of
Yeah.
why you're doing what you're doing.
Well, and sometimes you just aren't getting that feedback. It may be happening, you're just not hearing about it, and it's hard to if you don't have those things to look back to, that you've kept somewhere, it's hard to feel like you're doing the work that you want to be doing with any kind of impact when you're not getting the feedback. But that's very, very true. So when you look back, like early days, like you said that you wish somebody told you it was a difficult thing. I honestly like it's probably marriage is also a very difficult thing. Nobody tells you that either. But, combining 2 lives and living out the rest of your days with that one person it takes a lot of work, and it's worth it, but it takes a lot of work, and nobody tells you that it's a lot of work.
or
And
they
this
just tell you or they just tell you that it's like, yeah, marriage is hard, you just work through it, but like they don't really like tell you like the specifics of what you have to do. They just give you this like blanket statement.
Yeah. Like, you have no idea what that actually means.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I guess I'll sign here.
Right? Well, and with entrepreneurship, like from I it's hard for me sometimes to think back to that moment where I decided that's what I wanted to do. But I think that it's kind of the Instagram feed of life, looking at the outside of an entrepreneur and their business and their success. It looks different on the outside than it does on the inside, and it's hard to know the ways that it's hard without getting into it. But I think I would do it again because it is. I was like you. I was in a 9 to 5 that was sucking the life out of me and making me physically ill, and I can't go back. And those are some of the things too that resonate with me about your story is that, like, I have my mission. I want to help entrepreneurs. I want to help women not quit when they're in those first 3 years and just keep going. And it's okay that it's hard. That means something to me. And the fact that I am unemployable means something to me. Like, I don't want to go back. I can't go back. Like, there's nothing to go back to. And it keeps me going when it feels like I'm not getting anywhere. I'm just kind of confused. Like, what am I doing and what do I do now kind of thing. Anything else though when you're looking back that you feel like how I wish I'd known this or this was way more challenging than I thought it was going to be? Like, what advice would you give to someone just starting out?
I would say that it's really important to trust your gut and your intuition. There've been several decisions along the way that I didn't trust my gut, or I listened to someone else whose opinion I valued, but not necessarily in the context of my business. And I made decisions because I felt like that's what I should do. And, had I listened to my gut or my intuition, not that I don't think any decision is a bad decision, but I see the power of tuning into your intuition, because it's not something you can necessarily describe, but like, whether you feel it in your chest or your stomach, when you think about whatever the decision is, if you can just tune into what your body is telling you, that's usually the best answer. And I think as a society, we're kind of taught to think about like logic and deliverables, and but sometimes, I would say most of the time, if you can tune into the intuition, that's really the best decision for you. So I would just say trust your gut. And going back to what we were talking about before about like wish someone would have told me it would have been this hard. I sometimes think that naivety is a great asset, because sometimes it's good you don't know how hard something is, because maybe you wouldn't try. Right. And sometimes when I talk to people about, like sometimes I feel silly saying, well, I want to stop climate change, or I want to help plastic pollution, because people are like, yeah, right. But I think that it's my lack of cynicism, or some people want to call it naivety, that keep me moving forward, even when people say, well, you can't do that, or that's too hard. Yeah. So, I think that those can be assets.
That's a good point. Yeah, there are things that, looking back, I probably wouldn't have tried if I knew how hard it was.
But you learned a ton from it that you could have never quantified ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's worth it. Totally. Well, I love what you said about trusting your gut, because when I look back in my business, in my life is another story that we don't have time for, but in my business in particular, the times when I didn't trust my gut and I made that decision, I got there eventually, and I went back to what I knew going in was the right thing, but it took me a lot longer, and it was a lot more painful. And like, if I had just listened to myself, it would have saved myself a lot of heartache and pain, and probably money, and it can be so powerful to just really listen.
Yeah, and it takes some time to like actually know what that reaction is in your body. Like, some people feel it in their chest, some people feel it in their stomach. It's like, it's different for everyone. And, I think back to like, a client that I signed on to, and like from the get-go, when I spoke with the person, I just felt like, this is not the client for me. And I had other, people in my life who were like, you should do it. Like, you have no reason not to. Like, who cares? Like, whatever. And like, the relationship ended up being fruitful in some ways, but it was also really excruciating for me in other ways. Yeah. And, in hindsight, it brought in great, revenue for the business, and, it was a long-term client, but, I also felt like pulling teeth a lot of the time. And had I listened to my gut, I probably wouldn't have worked with that client, even though it had benefits to my business and to their business. But like in hindsight, I can see like my gut was telling me what I should have done, and I didn't listen to it. So,
yeah, it is interesting because, some of that is beneficial. We learn from it. There are several things in my work life, like the rules that get established in any kind of business environment. Like I worked for Habitat for Humanity for a little while, and one of the homeowners wanted to paint her door a specific color on her house, and for some reason it became this huge ordeal with the homeowners association and all of these things. And so now, like, that became a very explicit rule that you couldn't, I don't know, I don't think it was very specific that you like couldn't paint your door or whatever, but it there was this crazy rule that came out of our experience with this one homeowner and kind of the fallout from that. And there's all these rules and regulations and things that we see kind of in the business world. Like there's that cat scratchers are made out of cardboard.
Mm.
And so there there's a disclaimer. There's a cat scratcher at, I think it's at Target, that it literally says cat scratcher for cats only. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, what had to happen for them to have to say on that product that that's for cats only? Like what led to that necessity? But it's like the things that happen to us that create these new boundaries. I like the terrible clients that I have had over the years, that it's like, oh my God, like I have to change the wording in my agreement. I have to have a better agreement. Like these things we learn from them, right? And it becomes kind of part of our business going forward. And it's hard for me to know sometimes, like, do I do this because it's going to help me learn, or do I not do it because it would be easier not to? So it's an interesting process, I think, for how we grow.
Yeah, and in a way, it helps you realize what you don't want, like who you don't want to work with, and so then you can say like, okay, that type of person is not a good fit for me, so I'm gonna like hone in on the ideal client for me, and I may have to turn away business, but it keeps me in alignment, and then I show up as a better consultant, because if I'm working with the right people, then I show up as my best self and I can be of greatest service. But if I'm showing up for a client who it feels like pulling teeth to work with, I'm not going to show up as my best self. So that's a disservice to me, and it's a disservice to them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So obviously I love our planet, and I do what I can to be really mindful, like of the businesses I work with and the products that I buy. I'm not perfect in any way, and I'm probably like nowhere near your level of sustainability, but for people like me, like what's the first step that you would have us do to be more sustainable in our businesses? Like what can we look at today, really actionable step that we can change in our businesses?
I would say if you have any freelancers or employees, take a look at what you're paying them and make sure that it's a fair living wage. Because if people are working for payment that they can't sustain their livelihood on, then they're not going to be able to work for you long term, and so it's not sustainable for them. It's not sustainable for you. And like a really easy one would be, at least here in the US, you can actually switch over your electricity to renewables fairly easy. There's some ways that you can do it within like 5 minutes. And so whether it is you have a home office and you switch your whole home over to that, or you have, an outside office and, the bill every month comes in your name, as long as you have the bill in your name, you can swap that over very, very easily. And it's not an extra cost to you. So that's always like a big thing. So those are two pretty, simple things that you could literally take action on today. And then in terms of like a little bit more long-term, you could also switch over wherever you host your website. You can switch that over. A lot of times that they have you locked into like a 1, 2, 3 year plan or whatever with regular hosting companies. So find out when your current hosting is up for renewal, and then kind of make a game plan to switch over to that when that time comes.
Are there hosting companies that you like to recommend?
Yeah, so I use one called Green Geeks. I switched over to them a couple of months ago, and dollar for dollar, it was pretty much the same as all the others. And they, for every 1 unit of energy your website takes, they purchase 3 renewable energy credits. And so not only is the website carbon neutral, it's actually carbon negative times 3, which is really awesome. So when I did my research, they were the ones that had the best initiatives. So I would definitely recommend them.
Awesome. So quick question about the freelancers and service providers, the people on our teams that we use to support our businesses. Obviously, when you're early days, it's money's tight and you're looking for that cheapest solution sometimes. What is your thought about having, I know several entrepreneurs that use like virtual assistants that are in other countries that their wage maybe in that location is sustainable, but if it was here it wouldn't be sustainable. Like, what is your thought about kind of outsourcing to other countries where it's much lower?
I think it depends on the country, but I would say, if you are hiring someone, in India or Singapore, the Philippines, like make sure that that whatever it is that you're paying them is a living wage. You can certainly look that up if you look up like living wage and then you put in the city of wherever that person is. It can give you an approximate. But yeah, obviously, outsourcing to other countries where it's less expensive. Like I totally understand that. I've been there myself. But one thing that I have learned, and to be honest, it's more of a language barrier than anything else, but I have gone the route of going and finding the cheapest possible service provider. I often find that perhaps because of the language barrier that comes with, working with certain international countries, that you don't get the quality of work that you want. And again, it's not because of the location of the person, it's more like a language issue. And so I have found that it's beneficial in the long run to pay for quality that can exist any place in the world. But again, I guess I would just make sure that wherever you're hiring someone, make sure that it is fair and it's not just, the cheapest possible thing you can find, because, as an entrepreneur, you also want to find people who you can use in the long run. And finding someone who's super cheap that is not going to get the job done how you want it is just going to be more time for you in the long run, because then you're going to have to find someone else. You're going to have to spend time doing research, and that might it's taking away money from you if you have to spend more time doing that. So like think about the long term and not just like the short term cost analysis.
That's a really good point. It makes me think of like getting a logo through Fiverr or something where it's like really below what you would normally pay, but the quality that you get and what you're actually looking for, you're going to end up redoing it again and again because it's not going to be what you want and you're going to have to pay anyway. So it's not ideal to do something like that. I would really agree with that.
Yeah, I did that in the beginning. I would go on Fiverr or Upwork and try to find the cheapest person to do the logo, or the cheapest person to do this, or the cheapest person to speed up my website. And when you get what you pay for, and I think that also ties into sustainability a lot, because if you're looking for the cheapest product or the cheapest clothing, there are places where costs are cut, and you don't necessarily see that as a consumer. But those costs come out of factory workers, farmers who grow the raw materials, people who are doing their best, but are getting the short end of the stick, and it's not their fault, So I really do think that quality is important, and it saves you money, time, energy in the long run. And I just reached a stage in the first couple of years of my business where I was like, okay, obviously the $5 Fiverr thing, like it's not going to work long term, and it doesn't give me the quality that I want. So it's not, I'd rather pay more. And I had several instances where I worked with freelancers and even with freelancers in the US, where you're still, finding the cheapest possible thing. And it's a pain in the butt,
Absolutely. And, one of my values as a business owner is caring about other business owners. And if I'm paying you really ridiculously low fees, that's not good for anybody. I'm not helping you. You're not helping me. Like, it's not a good idea to, really jump on that really ridiculously low. They're obviously paying for that with time and other things that, just because it's cheap for me, it's expensive for them to be able to provide any kind of service at those rates. So I don't like to condone that either.
Yeah. And even, I've noticed too, like, even if like you work with a freelancer or even someone that who like is a coder or whatever, and they give you a low price because they want to get the business, they are then not motivated to, like what I said before about compromising who you work with, right? Like they are then, if they're not getting paid what their value is, then they're not going to show up as their best self in what you're paying them to do. And so you still don't get the kind of result that you want. So like, people say money is a exchange of energy or something like that. Like if you're not paying people the right fair wage, they're not going to show up as their best self. You're not going to get the best product. So it's a win-win for everyone when you pay people based on value.
Well, and you're showing them that you value them as people, not just a cheap deal.
Exactly.
Well, I've learned so much in this short amount of time, and I can't wait to go comb through my service providers and make sure I'm making good decisions. I really appreciate all the words of wisdom and the experience that you have and sharing your story. And thank you so much for being on the podcast, Shannon. It's been a pleasure.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much, Peppa.
Thank you, Shannon, for talking with us today. You can find out more information about Shannon and the link to her website in the show notes for this episode at smallbusinesssisterhood.com/31. I hope you found this episode useful and inspiring. If you did, please pop over to iTunes and leave a review. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.